Number 1. Billie Jean Hall. Billie Jean Hall, age 24, disappeared after leaving her Maryland home en route to Florida. She was last seen on March 3, 1985. Billie Jean and a friend left their hometown in Jessup, Maryland on February 28, 1985. They were traveling in a camper. Some sites state it was a Nissan Datsun, while others state it was a 1984 Marigo camper. They were headed to Bike Week in Daytona Beach, FL. According to a friend of the Hall family, Billie Jean and her companion met a man named Aubrey in Virginia, and they traveled to Brunswick, Georgia. Billie Jean's companion had a disagreement with Aubrey, and returned to Maryland on March 3. Although it is not known whether Billie made it to Daytona Beach, it is worth noting that her credit cards were used extensively in Florida, although not by her, but by mail. Billie's camper was later found in Aubrey's possession in Cameron, OK. He was questioned, and stated that he and Billie had gone to Daytona Beach, where Billie had gone off with someone else. He stated that when Billie never returned, he took the camper. Aubrey was charged with stealing the vehicle. I do not know if Billie Jean's companion was male or female, but can only imagine that he or she was not too pleased about the idea of this man they'd just met traveling with them to Florida. I assume that traveling with them to Florida was his intent, based on the fact that he, with or without Billie, did end up in Florida, with Billie's credit cards. Aubrey claimed he'd been with her in Florida as well. It's worth noting that Billie Jean had suffered some brain damage, along with other major injuries, as a result of a prior traffic accident. I've seen no mention of symptoms. However, it's possible that her judgment was impaired. Did Billie Jean never leave Georgia? Were there any credit card transactions in Florida that were confirmed to be Billie herself? Was the male that was using her credit cards ever identified? Where in Brunswick, GA was Billie last seen? In her camper? In a house? A park? A gas station? When the camper was found, were any of Billie's personal belongings found inside? Anything notable on the bed? Any sign of a struggle? Was there any indication of how long the camper had been in Cameron, Oklahoma, a town of 300 people? Due to the extensive injuries Billie had sustained in her auto accident, I'm confident that her remains have not been recovered. A metal plate in her skull, for instance, would stand out. I'm looking at requesting a copy of the court records for the auto theft charge, to see if it provides any additional clues. It will be a challenge, though. Cameron, OK, is a tiny little town of 300 people. Their public offices don't even have websites. Number 2. Bridget Lee Pendle Williamson. Bridget Lee Pendle Williamson, age 23, was last seen in San Francisco, California in April 1997. Bridget had what seemed to be a fairy tale life. She lived in Vermont, was a student at Barbizon School for Modeling, and was a registered nurse. She was married and had a young daughter. Somewhere along the way, however, she got in with a bad crowd, and eventually left her life in Vermont behind in order to follow the Grateful Dead around the country. Sometimes she would take her daughter with her on her travels, other times she would leave her with relatives in Vermont. Bridget left Vermont for the last time, with her daughter, in early 1996. By this time, she had descended into a life of drug addiction and had been in a recovery program just prior to leaving Vermont. When she left a bag at her mother's doorstep. In it, was a notebook that contained her poetry. Among the writings was this: "Kneel next to me, at the bedside of madness. Several explore the agony of her addiction. I'm tainted, forever, due to you, and your evils. Vomit, on the floor, at the thought of your rush, through my veins." After arriving in San Francisco, Bridget was known to be staying at an SRO, low-rent hotel, at 376 Ellis Street, and may have also stayed at similar hotels such as the Eula, and the 16th Street Hotel. She was living with a man known as Cosmic Charlie Aldo. In April 1996, Bridget's sister came to San Francisco and met Bridget at the 376 Ellis Street Hotel, where she brought Bridget's daughter back to Vermont. That was the last time anyone in Bridget's family saw her. In April 1997, Bridget was arrested for prostitution in the area of 16th and Cap Streets. She did not appear for her court date, and that was the last known sighting of her. Bridget's sister Jackie went to San Francisco in 2004, in an unsuccessful attempt to locate Bridget. She talked to a myriad of homeless people, and many suggested that she may be a prostitute working under the name Butterfly. Several others, however, thought Bridget resembled a homeless woman known as the Crier. A photo of the Crier is below. Others said they were sure they'd seen her with tribal tattoos on her face. Bridget's late sister came across Cosmic Charlie hanging out on Haight Street. He said he had not seen Bridget since 1998 or 1999, and that he'd last seen her in the same area where she was arrested. There are numerous agencies in San Francisco that cater to the homeless. There are even census takers who comb the streets of San Francisco trying to get a count of the homeless population. There are needle exchanges, methadone clinics, soup kitchens, and outreach programs. They probably have no idea she's missing. However, since her case is being investigated by the Santa Cruz Police Department, some sites state she was last seen in Santa Cruz, which is misleading. Reports show that there were over 6,000 homeless people in San Francisco at the last count in 2013. It is worth noting that Jerry Garcia died in 1995. Although Grateful Dead continued to tour after Jerry's death, they undoubtedly lost some of their following. This may have been the point that Bridget went from deadhead to the state she was found in later. Bridget's family misses her and would like to get in contact with her. An unusual feature of Bridget's is a blue cat tattoo on the abdomen. If you have any information on her whereabouts, please let her know that her daughter, now an adult, really wants to see her mom. Number 3. Raymond Dale Harris. Raymond Dale Harris, age 20, was last seen in Omaha, Nebraska on November 26, 1971. Raymond Harris married Mary Sudak in Douglas County, Nebraska on October 2, 1971, nearly 2 months prior to Raymond's disappearance. The couple lived with Raymond's father in Omaha, NE. The living arrangements were reportedly not going well, and they decided to move out of his father's home. Raymond told his sister that they would be going to her home in Des Moines, Iowa. The couple was driving a 1970s model green 4-door Chevrolet. Raymond has never been heard from again. There was heavy snow in the area on the night they left, but searches of the area turned up no evidence of an accident. It was initially believed that both Raymond and Mary were missing, but over time, some occurrences have brought that theory into question. In 1993, 22 years after the couple was last seen, Raymond's sister was contacted by a member of Mary's family. The caller inquired about Raymond's whereabouts, but not about Mary's, which caused her to wonder if Mary's whereabouts were known to her family. Additionally, Raymond's family later learned that Mary Teresa Sudak Harris applied for a Social Security card in January 1972. It's been said that Raymond may have suffered from anxiety and/or depression. He had been discharged from the military on medical grounds. The investigation into Raymond's disappearance has resulted in some unfortunate circumstances. The case changed hands several times due to retirements from the police department. The file on Raymond's disappearance has been lost, and he was mistakenly reported as found in 2005. Raymond's sister has submitted DNA but has been unable to find out what, if anything, was done with it. Raymond Harris is not in Namas. It is unknown whether law enforcement has attempted to contact Mary or her family to see what they know about Raymond's fate, but it does not appear that any contact has ever been made, since he reportedly left Omaha with Mary in November 1971, and Mary applied for a Social Security card in January 1972. I think this would be an obvious and critical lead. What location did she use as an address when applying for Social Security? Since Mary's family did not contact Raymond's sister inquiring about his, but not Mary's, whereabouts until 1993, would this imply that they knew where Raymond was until shortly before they contacted her? When was Mary's Social Security number last used? Has Raymond's been used since 1971? Did Raymond and Mary ever divorce? Did they have any children? Have vital records been checked for these things? Why was Raymond mistakenly reported as found in 2005? According to Raymond's sister, law enforcement stated that he had turned himself in, although they later stated that was not true and it was an error. Could it be that Raymond did turn himself in, but requested that this information not be made public and someone initially let the cat out of the bag? It is worth noting that Raymond is still listed as missing on the Omaha Crime Stoppers website. I think this case has a very good chance of being solved, if someone who is privy to the necessary records would make the effort to solve it. Raymond has been missing for 42 years, and his family would really like to know that he is okay. Number 4. Eileen Frances Hinson. Eileen Hinson, age 19, was last seen in Napa, California on June 1, 1976. Eileen was last seen as she left her resort residence at Lake Berryessa, en route to a bridal party dress fitting in Benicia, California. She resided with her father and brother at the time, and left her suitcase in the residence. She has never been heard from again. Note: Nama states she was on her way to a wedding, as opposed to a bridal fitting. Information on this case is scant, as there is no indication given of how she intended to get to Benicia. Did she have her own car, or access to a family car, that she was to drive to Benicia? Was someone she knew supposed to pick her up? Was she planning to hitchhike? Although it is mentioned that she left her suitcase behind, it is not clear whether it had been expected that she'd take her suitcase with her to Benicia. That is how I initially took it, which would mean that she hadn't actually left for the bridal fitting yet, since she didn't have her suitcase with her. It could also mean that while she wasn't expected to take it with her to the bridal fitting, the fact that she didn't take it with her would indicate that she'd planned to return to Lake Berryessa that same day. Either way, the idea that she would have disappeared of her own accord seems unlikely. There has been some speculation that Eileen could be the unidentified Santa Rosa hitchhiker victim that was located northeast of Santa Rosa in 1979. This unidentified victim, as of yet, has not been entered into NamUs, and I'm not sure why. A web sleuther inquired about her being placed into NamUs about 2 years ago, and was told it was being looked into. The unidentified Caucasian woman was said to be approximately 19 years old, 5'3", auburn or brown hair, and wore contact lenses. She also had a healed rib fracture. Their guess of the year of death was 1972 to 1974, although 1976 may still be a possibility. I would like to find out if Eileen was hitchhiking, and if she wore contact lenses and/or had any rib fractures. Due to the proximity of the remains in comparison with other victims of the Santa Rosa hitchhiker killer, authorities are fairly certain that this UID was also a victim of the same person. Lots of information about the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders can be found here. If it were found that Eileen is a match to the unidentified victim, Ted Bundy could be ruled out as the hitchhiker killer, as he was incarcerated when Eileen went missing. I haven't done extensive research on the Zodiac killer, but I do recall that he tended to strike at night, when there was a full moon. The day that Eileen disappeared, there was only a 9% sliver of a moon, and I believe she would have left the residence during daylight. It's worth noting that the Santa Rosa hitchhiker killer's known victims were from the Santa Rosa area. Although Napa, Lake Berryessa, is not terribly far from Santa Rosa, there would be no reason why Eileen would pass through Santa Rosa on the way to Benicia. The route would, however, have taken her for quite a ways down what appears to be a winding, treacherous mountain road, with nothing around for miles. I think finding out how she intended to get to Benicia is important, and I am hopeful that someone who remembers the event can shine some light on this. Eileen deserves to be found. Number 5. Alexis Stockburger. Alexis Stockburger, age 12, disappeared from Albany, New York in August 1919. Depending on which media source you read, her age could have been 12 or 15. I'm going with 12 because it is backed up by 1910 census records, where she is listed as 2, as opposed to 5. The reported date she went missing also ranges from August 7, 1919 to August 14, 1919, with one mention of May 1919, which is obviously incorrect. August 9 is the most likely date, because there was a reference in one article to the date having been a Saturday, which August 9 was. Lastly, the spelling of her name varies from Alexis to Alexis to Alexia to Alexis. Alexis was the daughter of George Stockburger and his wife Nellie. George was a railroad train master with the New York Central Railroad, and had passed away 10 months before Alexis disappeared. Alexis was the youngest of her family, with an older sister, Esther, and 2 older brothers, Frederick and George Jr. Alexis left her home at 12 Chestnut Street in the late morning, to meet her sister at the intersection of Washington Avenue and Swan Streets, which was a couple blocks from her home. This was something she did frequently. She would reportedly wait at the intersection, and her sister, then 18, would emerge from a car at about 12:05 p.m. A witness claimed to have seen Alexis waiting there, although by the time her sister arrived, she was gone. Police were aware of a gypsy caravan that had passed through Albany that day, and initially believed she may have gone with them. After a week had passed, her mother discounted this theory, claiming that her daughter would have made contact with her by then. The only clues to ever surface regarding her possible whereabouts were a few letters that were sent to Alex's mother, and a vague witness account of her being seen in a car. One of the letters, written by a woman, suggested that Mrs. Stockburger should come to her at once if she wished to find her little one. A group of reporters traveled to the sender's location, and located the author of the letter. She stated that she'd been having visions of a girl in a white dress being transported in a buggy with an older man. It was quickly considered a false lead, and the reporters went home. Within days of Alex's disappearance, Terrence W. O'Connor, a foreman who was resurfacing East Creek Road, reported that he and his co-worker, Guy McAllister, had seen a wine-colored automobile pass by. The vehicle had a male driver, and Terrence stated that they saw a girl standing against the window, nervously shaking her arms as if trying to get someone's attention. The car then stopped a ways up the road, and the girl got out, followed by someone who appeared to have their arm wrapped around her neck. That portion of the article was not very clear as to who exactly was holding her. It looked like it said the woman, but there had been no mention of a woman in the car. He said the description of Alex's clothing, a green gingham dress, a black patent leather belt, and no hat, was similar to that of the girl he saw. Police were unable to locate this vehicle, and after that, the case went cold. In March 1921, a girl named Harriet Menton, age 10, disappeared from the same street that Alexis lived on. Harriet lived at 206 J Street, and her school was on Chestnut Street. She would normally walk down J Street, turn on Swan, and then turn on Chestnut. She was last seen turning onto Chestnut Street. Harriet's parents were initially unconcerned, as Harriet would often go visit her grandmother, who lived in the same neighborhood, after school. Once enough time had passed, Harriet's parents went to the grandmother's house, and learned that Harriet had not been there. They then learned that she had not been to school, and concern turned into panic. Again, searches by law enforcement turned up nothing. Soon after Harriet's disappearance, some school children reported a man in his 50s, who had been hanging around the school and trying to engage the children in conversation. One of the teachers reported this to police. A man was brought in for questioning, and initially refused to tell officers his name, but later stated his name was John Hoffman. He said he lived in the basement at 3 South Hawk Street, and that he looked after some furnaces on Chestnut Street. He admitted that he knew Harriet, but said he had not seen her on the day she went missing. Children from the school identified him as the man who had been hanging around the school, but he was not held by police. After checking city directories from 1921, the address Hoffman gave of 3 South Hawk Street matched up to a Lillian 11. No other residents were listed at that address, and the only John Hoffmans in the directory were listed in different parts of Albany. Most were married with their own families. None had occupations relating to furnaces. Lillian Josephine 11 was single at the time, and would later marry machinist Robert Smith Daly on April 17, 1922. Robert and Lillian, 11, Daly lived at 3 South Hawk Street as late as 1960. According to the 1930 census, they had several lodgers living with them. None were named John Hoffman, or had any occupations pertaining to furnaces. Additionally, in 1920, the house at 3 South Hawk Street was owned by a widow named Agnes Dixon. Her occupation is listed as keeper, rooming house. There were a few lodgers staying there at that time, as well. So although there's no sign of a John Hoffman, and that was probably not his real name, it is possible that he actually did live there. I could not find any indication that Harriet has ever been found, either. I seem to recall some time ago, which searching through the unidentifieds on Namas, there was one, I thought New York, but possibly New Jersey or another surrounding state, that was believed to have died in the first half of the 20th century, with no further narrowing of the time of death. I recall a mention of cement, and a facial imprint that had been made by the skull. I thought the remains had been found in the 1980s or earlier, but I can no longer find it. I remember, at the time, wondering if it could belong to Dorothy Arnold. I wonder if it's been identified, or if I'm just remembering a piece of it incorrectly. Someone claiming to be a descendant of Alexis Stockburger's brother, Frederick, shared a recollection of a family Bible, in which Frederick had written, with regard to Alexis, stolen away. Another family member, in the 1990s, had inscribed, and to this day, have never heard whether dead or alive. They lived in Albany at the time. I do remember the talk about it at the time. It does not appear that either Alex's or Harriet's cases are open investigations, therefore they are not listed on NamUs or other databases. It seems that back in those days, they just closed the case if no leads turned up after a certain amount of time. I want it to be known that these girls existed, and that they are missing, in the event that their remains are found missing. Number 6. Sylvia Aleslowski. Sylvia Aleslowski, age 22, disappeared from Staten Island, New York on September 6, 1975. She had planned on going to see a movie at the Island Theater on Richmond Avenue, with her fiancé. At the time, movies such as Jaws and Rocky Horror Picture Show would have been showing. Reports state that she left for her movie date and never returned. Her fiancé would later state that he and Sylvia had argued, which resulted in Sylvia throwing her eyeglasses at the dashboard and running from the car. There is very little official information available on this case. A good friend of Sylvia's has come forward to discuss her disappearance, under certain expectations of anonymity. For the purpose of this blog entry, I'll call her Lauren. Lauren had been with Sylvia earlier in the day that she disappeared. They had gone shopping, and at roughly 4 p.m., Lauren dropped Sylvia off at home so she could get ready for her date. Sylvia seemed to be in good spirits, and was looking forward to going to the movies. In the early evening, Sylvia's fiancé picked her up as scheduled, and they drove off, presumably headed to the movie theater, which was about 10 minutes from her home. At approximately 10 p.m. that night, Sylvia's fiancé appeared in front of Lauren's home. He rolled down his window, and angrily stated that he and Sylvia had gotten into an argument, and that she'd gotten out of the car near the Staten Island Mall, telling him she'd take the bus home. He asked Lauren to pick Sylvia up at the bus stop, before abruptly driving away. Lauren and her father drove around the vicinity of the mall, but did not see any sign of Sylvia. At this point, they assumed that she'd gotten on a bus during time that it took them to get there. They returned home. At approximately 10:30 p.m., Sylvia's fiancé arrived at Sylvia's home, and spoke with her family about the fact that Sylvia had gotten out of the car. Sylvia's mother quickly headed for the Staten Island Mall area, and drove around without locating her. She attempted to file a missing persons report, but was told that she needed to wait until Sylvia had been missing for 24 hours. After filing a missing persons report the following day, the Lowski family found that the case was being handled as nothing more than a voluntary missing adult case. A couple weeks after Sylvia's disappearance, Sylvia's mother hired a private investigator. We do not know the identity of this investigator, but Lauren, and Sylvia's surviving family would be interested in speaking with him. If anyone has access to Staten Island Yellow Pages from 1975 and can scan a copy of the private investigator category, I'd be grateful. Lauren contacted Sylvia's fiancé by phone on a couple occasions following her disappearance, and was told never to call him again. He was completely unwilling to answer any questions. It is not known if he was ever questioned by law enforcement. The only other potential clue that has surfaced is that Lauren had given someone a ride home from Manhattan sometime after Sylvia's disappearance, and it turned out that this individual was acquainted with Sylvia's fiancé. This individual stated to Lauren that Sylvia's fiancé had her engagement ring in his possession. According to the police report, the ring was missing along with Sylvia. There is much speculation that Sylvia's fiancé knows something about her disappearance, and there is doubt as to whether they ever went to a movie at all that night. If it is true that her fiancé had the ring, it would imply that either there was a breakup, as opposed to just an argument, or that the ring was retrieved at a later time. There is a possibility that Sylvia did return the ring during an argument, threw her glasses at the dash, and exited the car, only to fall prey to serial killer Andre Rand. The location where Sylvia was last known to be is in the scope of Rand's comfort zone. I find it unlikely, however, because Rand preferred young children, or those with mental disabilities who he perceived as vulnerable. He was reportedly rather standoffish with other adults. If Sylvia's fiancé did harm her, I find it unlikely that it happened on Richmond Avenue, near the Staten Island Mall. It's a busy area, and a commotion would have been noticed. It would be more likely that they were never near the mall, and instead went to a hotel or Lover's Lane where an altercation occurred. Otherwise, I'd have to think it was premeditated, meaning that from the mall, he'd made up his mind that he was going to harm her, and drove her someplace secluded. It's also worth noting that the movie theater was approximately 10 minutes from Sylvia's home. An average movie is 90 minutes, plus 20-30 minutes accounted for in drive time. That still leaves 2–3 hours. Sylvia had been picked up between 5–6 p.m., and her fiancé appeared at Lauren's house at 10 p.m. Sylvia is a native of Germany, but had been in New York for most of her life. Her parents have both passed away without ever learning their daughter's fate. Sylvia's mother kept all of Sylvia's engagement gifts in the hope that she would someday return. Sylvia loved animals, gardening, and collecting seashells. She was a member of the Wagner College Band. Number 7. Johnny Joe Herrera. Johnny Joe Herrera, age 20, disappeared from Oxnard, California on August 27, 1971. He was last known to have been at a friend's bachelor party in the 700 block of West Cedar Street in Oxnard. Neither Johnny nor his car have been seen since, except for an unconfirmed sighting at a nearby McDonald's. At the time of his disappearance, he was married and had a 10-month-old son. He was eventually reported missing by his twin brother 5 days after he was last seen. There is no evidence that his case was thoroughly investigated or publicized at the time. Oxnard newspapers from that time period are archived online, but there is no mention of him to be found. Details are still sketchy, although multiple theories have been presented by those interested in the case. One theory is that he left of his own accord, feeling trapped by the responsibilities of fatherhood and marriage. Although his family stated in a newspaper article that Johnny appeared to be happy, it has been speculated by someone involved with the case that Johnny and his wife may have been experiencing marital and/or financial problems. Another theory is that he became intoxicated at the bachelor party and accidentally drove into a ravine or other body of water after leaving the party. It's worth noting that both of the above theories exist mainly as possible explanations for why his car has never been found. It has further been theorized that an altercation or overdose of some sort may have occurred at the party, which resulted in his death. This theory comes into play due to the fact that it has never been reported that anyone saw him leave the party, just that he was seen at the party. Then, of course, there is the serial killer theory. Randy Kraft was known to prey on young men in Southern California beginning in 1972. He has been nicknamed the Scorecard Killer, as he kept a list of 61 terms and phrases that are believed to represent his victims. The terms are not dated, except in cases where law enforcement have connected his list entries to actual victims. They are not in chronological order. Ironically, there is an entry of Oxnard that has not been connected to a specific victim. Of the 61 terms on the scorecard, 43 have been matched to actual victims by law enforcement. Each of the 43 that have been matched have been found deceased, which leads me to believe that only unsolved homicides were used to compare with the list, and missing persons were not taken into account. Therefore, I find it likely that the remaining unmatched cases are those of missing persons. I was able to locate one missing male with ties to Oxnard between 1963 and 2000. His name is Johnny Joe Herrera. One thing, however, does cast doubt on the theory of Herrera being a Kraft victim. All 43 matched victims of Kraft, unless I overlooked anything, were located in plain sight, mostly in parking lots, on the side of roads, and the like. It didn't seem to be his mo to hide his victims. That said, I would expect to see potential matches for Herrera in the unidentifieds, if he were a victim of Kraft, because it stands to reason that he'd have been found rather quickly. But I don't see any. The theory of a Kraft victim also begs the question, where is the car? Another possible serial killer connection that has been mentioned is Patrick Carney. He also was active in the area, although he seemed to have a tendency toward gay young men that he could lure into his home or car by turning on the charm. He did pick up hitchhikers and transients occasionally. However, I don't see Johnny falling into this trap. He had a family to get home to. I don't think he would have appeared vulnerable enough for Carney's taste. That, of course, is just my own opinion. One of the members of Webb's Sleuths has been relentless in trying to get attention on this case, which has, for 42 years now, been virtually unknown to the society at large. If you are interested in this case, and would like to help get the word out, you are encouraged to check out this list of media contacts, and request them to feature his case. Johnny, please come home.